think we can start. Do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us for PQMD's July Pillar Talk, Countering COVID-19, Counterfeiting. A part of a larger series of webinars which the PQMD Community of Practice offers to address major trends, leading thinking, best practices, and proactive issues in global health. I can't think of a better topic to discuss during Guidelines Week at PQMD. Our guidelines for quality medical product donations is our guiding light flagship document. And as other members recently put it, product quality is the soul of our guidelines. And preventing counterfeit or substandard products from entering supply chains and posing unacceptable risks to recipients is essential to our mission. PQMD is able to put these webinars together because of the strength of our coalition and the depth of the work our members do every day. I'm Elizabeth Ashbourne, PQMD's Executive Director, and I want to welcome you on behalf of our entire team. For those of you who are not familiar with PQMD, we are a global alliance of international NGOs and leading healthcare companies committed to advancing the role of product donations worldwide. Founded in 1999, our work is guided by 5 pillars: humanitarian assistance, health system strengthening, disaster response preparedness, guidelines, and knowledge management. Today, the work of our members is central to the global response to universal health care, as well as the international response to coronavirus. Our members are focused on critical supplies, supporting healthcare workers, donating cash where most needed, and of course, strengthening health systems to promote sustainable access to quality healthcare in underserved communities and populations in crisis. Very quickly, I just want to review some housekeeping rules. So go ahead and warm up your fingers, please, and type your name in the chat box and let us know your organization as well so we know who is here. Because of the large audience, we request all participants to remain muted. We do invite you to use the chat box for questions and comments. The session is being recorded, so you'll be able to share it with colleagues and go back and listen again if you wish. And I will share the link for PQMD's online community of practice in the chat box, and be sure to join the timely and informative discussions with our members there as well. So now I have the pleasure of turning it over to Marcia Roeder, who is moderating this session. Marcia is currently the Senior Specialist for Strategic Philanthropy and Gifts in Kind at International Medical Corps. In this position, she's responsible for increasing revenue and mobilizing resources to meet organizational goals, including overseeing IMC's Gifts in Kind program. We are also proud to say Marcia is co-chair of the PQMD's Guidelines Committee. So as you can imagine, she's having a super busy week. Which is responsible for setting industry standards for medical donations. With more than 20 years of nonprofit experience, boundless energy, passion, and expertise, we are truly lucky to have Marcia as our moderator today. So thank you, and over to you, Marcia.
Thank you, EJ. That was quite an introduction, so thank you. And thank you all for joining this very important topic today. I'm so glad that you're here. So, as many of you know, at the height of the pandemic in 2020, there was a confluence of factors that came together to generate a global shortage of life-saving personal protection equipment. And so to meet this unprecedented demand and the urgency to protect frontline healthcare workers, organizations, hospitals, vendors were all driven to look for PPE way beyond their trusted networks and consider high volume purchases from really non-traditional brokers and manufacturers. And unfortunately, this really provided a path for counterfeiters to bypass the secure system, with the medical product supply chain. And it opened up the floodgates to a deluge of counterfeit PPE. So to put this in perspective, 3M alone had tracked the seizure of over 41 million counterfeit respirators. Pretty incredible statistic. So this influx of counterfeit PPE really illustrates how vendors, donors, and end users really have to remain extra vigilant in the vetting and testing of medical products, even under extreme demand pressure. So as the pandemic continues to ravage various parts of the globe, counterfeiter sophistication is really growing at an alarming rate. Specifically, for COVID-related medical products, test kits, and vaccines. And without effective and very vigorous countermeasures, these fake products can honestly hinder the world's efforts to emerge from the pandemic. So that is the reason why we put this together, this esteemed panel of experts, to kind of look at this from all the various angles. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to the actual experts themselves. So first up is Stanislaus Barrow, who is the head of anti-falsified medicines at Novartis. Stanislaus joined Novartis in 2017 and is based in Basel, Switzerland. I want to visit there someday, where he oversees the strategy, operations, and projects on combating falsified medicines, counterfeit, stolen, tampered, and illegally diverted. Stan has been involved in multiple high-profile investigations, enforcement, and litigation cases. Next is my esteemed colleague, Nicolo Yasinovic, who is the head of global procurement at International Medical Corps. In this position, he leads a team of 8 procurement specialists who really manage the international sourcing of medical and non-medical commodities, which services 28 country missions and 3 headquarter offices. Nicolo joined International Medical Corps in 2010 and has worked in several roles across the supply chain. And next, last but not least, is Dr. Adam Smith, who is the senior specialist with National Protection and Technology Laboratory, so NPPTL, at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, better known as NIOSH. And he supports NIOSH's personal protection technology program, whose mission is to prevent workplace-related injury, illness, and death by advancing the state of knowledge and application of PPT. Adam works out of the NIOSH Pittsburgh campus and is currently involved in the overarching PPT program and their efforts related to testing and certification of respirators, including exploring methods to reduce counterfeit filtering face piece respirators. So to learn more about the exceptional panelists, we're going to post a link to their full bios because that was just a little snippet of their accomplishments in the chat box. So I know that I just kind of read your titles and a little bit of background, but to the panelists, and I'll start with you, Stan, in your own words, can you tell us a little bit about the type of work that falls under your domain? We have such a wonderfully diverse and technically savvy panel. I just want the audience to get a little flavor from the corporate, NGO, and regulatory perspectives that each of you all bring. So Stan?
Sure, thank you very much, Marcia. So indeed, good morning, afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel. So I indeed lead at Novartis the program called Anti-Falsified Medicines. This program in nature has to be led, so it's led by Global Security, a function that I represent, but it's actually supported by 15 functions across the organization. So I think from the private sector perspective, it's important to understand the depths required to effectively address an issue like falsified medicines. And I think we'll come to elaborate a bit more about the threats to patient safety, different categories as well. But just internally from the private sector for pharma, 15 functions, we work day in, day out with colleagues from manufacturing, packaging, legal, public affairs, global health, pharmacovigilance, quality. I won't mention them all, but just to say, we just couldn't operate without the support of these functions. What is also very critical in terms of governance is to have the support from the top management. There is a very strong acknowledgement of the issue of falsified medicines by the Novartis Executive Committee. We report to them on a quarterly basis on the extent of our activities and what it is we're doing through various pillars, operational pillars, intelligence on threat analysis, in prevention, technologies that we develop to try to better detect falsified medicines on the enforcement, working with law enforcement and health authorities actually on the problem on the ground, and stakeholder engagement. On all of that, on all these accounts, we not only engage with the executive committee of Novartis, but we also report that into the annual report of the company. It's great visibility, but it's also having accountability for what it is we do, on showing the good progress we believe we're making, but also the challenges we faced with, again, this criminal activity. We actually call this pharma crime. So and we mean to be very transparent, because we have to be humble about this. It's a big problem, and we also believe we can't tackle this alone. Private sector neither can do the public sector alone, and for us, collective action is really at the heart of the action we want to have. So I'll be happy to elaborate in a minute maybe about the actual categories on the work, but just wanted to introduce overall with the private sector perspective on the topic. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Stanislav. Nicolo, would you like to answer the same question?
Just if I could find the unmute button, that's fine. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Croatia. Yes, so for us, we've been the end users, right, of this end, meaning that we've been buying PPE actively for the last year and a half, and primarily for end users like healthcare providers and our staff, nurses and doctors, and also our own staff being exposed to a virus. For us, not being able to have the laboratories that these colleagues here have, we had to rely on basically the reputable bodies determining that the product is genuine. We applied two processes basically, which is we contracted a third-party company to verify that the certificates provided or said to be part of the belonging to the product is genuine. We did that by contacting directly the issuing body or to their website or manufacturers. We spoke with 3M several times. We actually caught some fake products. And that was before we would even engage with supplier on contracting. But then again, not having the presence on the ground because of various reasons, not being able to travel, not being in the countries where the PPE was manufactured, we wanted to make sure that we have someone to do this pre-ship inspection for us. So we engaged with several companies like SGS in China, Intertek and Baltic Control to verify the products before being loaded, that they are genuinely what we have contracted to be there. Even there, we had some issues at some times, which were then resolved to the point that manufacturer would remove the non-conformities, or they would simply be asked to cancel the contract because they were not able to fulfill what we agreed. So that was a bit of a lesson for us to learn, and it took us time to set up this mechanism, which thankfully we did, and it really worked well. So yeah, that's all from my end.
Thank you, Nicola. And Adam?
Thank you. So first off, I'd like to provide some context and mention that NIOSH is responsible for conformity assessment of respirators, including the N95 that was so prevalent during the response. These responsibilities include pre-market evaluation, approval or certification, and post-market evaluation of all NIOSH-approved respirators used in U.S. occupational settings. Our authorities are with those manufacturers who are considered approval holders, that is, those who have successfully obtained a NIOSH approval for the respirators. We do not have rigid definitions for counterfeit or substandard. A respirator is either NIOSH approved or it isn't. The term counterfeit in our context refers to a product that is misrepresenting the NIOSH approval and appearing to be a NIOSH approved product when it is not. Unfortunately, at this time, NIOSH does not have authority over producers of products that are not approval holders misrepresenting the NIOSH approval. Our authority is only with the approval holders. In our environment, a substandard product is a product that claims to perform according to a particular standard, but does not perform as labeled. For example, a product claiming to meet N95 level filtration efficiency that achieves less than N95 efficiency is considered substandard in our context.
Thank you. Actually, that leads really well into my next question for the panelists, because I think, COVID has really affected the landscape for counterfeit products from various areas. So I think it's important to kind of, there's so much terminology out there in the counterfeit and space. So, I mean, you've already referenced like counterfeit, falsified, substandard, fake, mislabeled. I think, Stan, I guess maybe this question's for you. So from your perspective as the head of, global head of anti-falsified medicines at Novartis, how do you define and classify counterfeit, and what does that mean today? And I guess I'm also wondering, from a global and domestic perspective, like what are the pervasive challenges, that these efforts have?
Thank you, Marcia. Yeah, very important question for us. Actually, we've been debating about this internally for a long time. The function I represent used to be called anti-counterfeiting. We liked that at the time because it was very visible, something everybody understands as well. So let's put it that way, from a visibility perspective, that was a good name. The problem we had is it's only showing a part of the problem as well. So we have renamed ourselves consistently with the WHO definition of falsified medicines, and I'll explain why now. So falsified medicines, as defined by WHO, are actually medicines, medical products, that lie about their identity, composition, or source intentionally. So that could be potentially a lot of products. So I'll just briefly describe 4 different categories. So the first one everybody knows about, counterfeits. And even counterfeits, there are 2 ways to describe this. So first of all, I'll make it clear, here I exclude patent-related issues. We just mean to talk about medical products that bear brands of reputable pharma companies with market authorizations, legitimate products. But in these counterfeit products, these times it's manufactured by criminal organizations. In the products, you don't have anything that would be suitable for a patient to treat a particular condition. So I think just for the Novartis stats, in what we categorize as counterfeits, in over 95% of the cases that we had over the last few years, what did we have? We had no active ingredient. We had the incorrect active ingredient, which is for certain patients with very serious conditions, could be even worse, actually. So I'll give you an example of an anti-malarial where we found sildenafil, or some we find paracetamol or things like that. Same for the excipients, same scenarios, no excipients or not the right ones, undeclared ones, so the full package. But then worse, we find impurities in a good case, and we find toxic chemicals in a bad case, and a bad case happens fairly regularly with counterfeit medicines. So that's what we find. It's maximum patient safety impact, which means in almost every single case, 2 things would happen to the patient: therapeutic failure or death for very serious conditions. Serious harm for cases or therapeutic areas which are not as serious. But I mean, for Novartis, essentially, we're in the fields of anti-malarial, oncology, central nervous system, so pretty serious conditions. So usually the patient safety impact is dramatic. That's a counterfeit category, and I think that's priority number 1 for pretty much everyone. Where things are more complex with this category nowadays, and I say nowadays, it's over the last few years we've seen this evolving. Before everything was counterfeit, the packaging and inside the product itself. Now, criminal organizations are a bit more structured. They are agile as well. They have found ways to evade, we get better at this, they get better at that, unfortunately. So we see a lot of mix and match, whereby we have cases, the packaging is fake, but inside you can have a genuine product, like 3 other categories. Or the other way around, you have a counterfeit medical medicine, the product itself, but the packaging is genuine, but recovered through criminal organizations, can be recovered at a clinic level, at a pharmacy level, through various reasons, should have been destroyed, is not. Making things a lot more complicated for law enforcement and health authorities. So that's category number 1, counterfeits. And then come 3 other categories. I'll bundle into a different category altogether, related to supply chain security. And I think we'll elaborate on that throughout the discussion. I will name the 3: product theft, illegal diversion, and product tampering. And they're pretty self-explanatory. What is common to these 3 categories is that the products in the first place have been manufactured by legitimate companies. with market authorizations, again, on legitimate products. What happened then, later, further down the line, is a criminal activity. Products are stolen, they get out of the legitimate supply chain, and they resurface in other market or on the dark market, or even sometimes in the legitimate supply chain, but in other places as well. So the patient safety impact is significant because there could be issues with dosage, good distribution practice, storage of the products. Some are prescription-based, temperature-controlled. So I won't give you the full list, but we lose the entire visibility on the distribution, on the storage of the product. So there is a patient safety angle to it. Very closely linked is another category that we call product tampering. And usually that goes quite often with theft as well, or illegal diversion. It's a sort of a consequence. Tampering, it's basically essentially when you want to extend the expiry date of the product. They get stolen, they get illegally diverted, but you know, criminal organizations, they have their challenges as well. You may not be able to get the products on the market by the time the product expires. And then what you do, you just simply extend on the packaging the expiry date from 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't need to elaborate on the patient safety impact. The active ingredient fades away. Again, there are a number of consequences as well for patients on this one. And then illegal diversion is the last category, the most complex one, but it's basically where a product intended for a market is taken from that market and illegally moved to another one where it is being sold. It's two drivers for this, could be pricing, could be access as well. Could be a bit of both, but there is always obviously a leverage on this that is used by criminal organizations. I say illegal because it's either illegally taken from the market or illegally moved to the other market or entered in the other one, and sometimes it's illegally on both sides. It really depends on the regulation in the country, so it's quite subtle. It's quite a legally driven topic, but it's still very important for patients because once again, it's good distribution practice based on prescriptions, on the language used on the product, on certain expiry dates, and again. So there is a patient safety impact no matter what in relation to this activity, and besides it's illegal, and that shouldn't be taking place in the first place. So 4 categories, 1 on 3 others, quite different. But the one thing we all need to remember is for criminal organizations, that doesn't matter at all, whatever they make money with. So we go after criminal organizations together with law enforcement with whom we work very closely. On cases show, enforcement cases at the moment, that we have criminal organizations who deal with the 4 categories. It's just really what they can get their hands on and leverage their profits with. That doesn't matter at all. So that's why it's important to have this umbrella definition of falsified medicines. And I think the WHO was spot on this, because we shouldn't get too subtle either about this or that. It's illegal, it's a criminal activity, and it has patient safety impact, pretty significant ones. That's what we should all remember and focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanislav. That was incredibly helpful and definitely eye-opening. I mean, you know, the impacts on patient safety is it's critical. So Nicolo, building upon what Stan just said, you know, from your vantage point, you know, from the NGO sector, you know, what types of counterfeit or falsified products do you personally come across? And, you know, if you can give your perspective on like what is the most concerning in your view.
Actually, I got chills because as Stan was talking about what they consider, what they counter, I mean, I've been through that live with these 10 years. You know, speaking of pharma, right, you know, we move huge quantities of pharma around the world to all these countries. We had cases from a, you know, very poor photoshopping of certificates or things like that to very, very elaborate investigations that took more than a year to figure out what happened. In one country, we had a case where we will get the shipment, the count will be done, the quality check we do mandatory at receipt to warehouse will be done, and they will be reporting to us different batches, different expiry dates, we couldn't figure out, and we saw that they were actually very likely at the customs really involved, stealing products from different shipments coming in, and then swapping them between the consignees, matching the weight by adding water inside or something, just to make sure that we can get into a trace. How we caught them was that we got a batch number from a different supplier in a shipment of a second supplier. For us, this became just like a red flag, and then we involved the local police and everything else. We got a result. When it comes to the PPE, specifically talking about the COVID, it was really for us was two things, certificates passing through the third-party evaluation. But again, even a certificate doesn't make sure that, they might put in a box rocks at the end, right? So we had a third party also investigate the shipment itself. Most scrutiny, our process is the same. From day one, all the PPE went through the same process, but speaking of likelihood to get infected with COVID, of course, respirators were one of or the masks were most critically more scrutinized and all that. And here we saw, when we started this in April 2020, with a third party, we were at 55% rejected offers due to certificates and/or product not passing what we consider the QC. For us, that was not just the information on the packaging or information on the certificate, but also the sometimes very important for us as an end user is that the product can be genuine, the certificate can be genuine, but it's not what we wanted to buy, because let's be honest, there were so many newly developed companies and suppliers who had no prior experience. So for them, a mask was a mask or a respirator was a respirator, right? And they would push this onto you. It was our job to make sure that the product they claim to have is actually the one that we want to buy. This right now is at 21%, so it dropped down. And one of the reasons is because the traditional market recovered, something we're probably going to speak about right later on, is that the traditional market was basically wiped out in the first weeks of response. And then it took them time to come back online. And so this is why we are right now at average about 38% rejected offers or products.
Thank you, Nicola. And Adam, over to you. As you know, I think we already talked about a little bit about the categorization at NIOSH and PBTL, but like, what do you find the most prevalent or concerning from your perspective as a testing body? What are you seeing?
So from the perspective of the response, I can say that, and I'll go back to the NPPTL mission, which revolves around personal protective equipment, specifically advancing the state of knowledge and application of personal protective technologies. During the response, we've ramped up operations, increased the number of approvals, and performed faster turnaround times, and focused on air purifying respirators. During conventional operations, we process about 30 approval decisions per month. In 2020, we ramped up operations to reduce approval times from 60 to 90 days to 7 to 14 days for FFR approvals, and more than doubled our output to processing over 60 decisions per month. We initiated a public health emergency, which established allowing non-traditional respirator manufacturers to enter the marketplace. For these PHE approvals, we permitted these manufacturers to use their existing quality programs as temporary approach to increase supplies. We also increased the number of surgical N95 approvals. A memorandum of understanding was established between NIOSH and FDA, which resulted in FDA delegating responsibilities to evaluate fluid penetration, flammability, and biocompatibility requirements for surgical N95 FFRs to NIOSH. So now, rather than having two processes to complete, NIOSH approval process and the FDA 510K clearance process, manufacturers only go to NIOSH but are required to list their approved products with the FDA. In addition to increased use of NIOSH approved devices because of respirator shortages, CDC provided, as we all know, crisis capacity guidance to permit the use of respirators conforming to standards from other countries. While products conforming to these standards provided protection similar to NIOSH approved N95 devices, we were receiving reports that users did not feel protected by these devices. So we initiated a limited evaluation program to evaluate the filtration efficiency of these devices. These evaluations revealed that over 60% of the products that we received that claimed to conform to the standards did not meet the minimum NIOSH filtration requirements. The CDC strategy was for using non-NIOSH approved respirators developed by manufacturers who are not NIOSH approval holders expired on April 9th, 2021. It should be noted that one significant difference between these products and NIOSH approved products are the quality assurance requirements. So as you can see, our work certainly changed and expanded to address the evolving PPE landscape throughout the response.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Adam. So I think now that we all understand like kind of the terminology and everything, I think love to be able to talk about how COVID has really affected the landscape. So Stan, over to you. Can you elaborate on what I'll loosely call the collateral damage of COVID, specifically the pressure and the disruption in the supply chain, and how that kind of impacted the volume and level of counterfeit and falsified products? Or, if you can elaborate like on maybe some of the trends, that you're seeing in as far as theft and, what are you seeing there?
Sure. But there are two things we have really observed since the beginning of this pandemic, really, on the topic of falsified medicines. One, internet sales have been more than comforted. They have boomed really as being the main vector channel for the distribution of falsified medicines. Not surprisingly, because even in the legit world, that's what happened as well. So it's just a fairly natural move or trend, but nonetheless, that really confirmed that that was channel number one, and that's not the easiest one to monitor, to enforce, to investigate. So obviously, it has its challenges across all platforms, really. So commercial platforms, obviously. Online pharmacies, or rogue online pharmacies, I should call. And social media is the new thing. I mean, they're really, we have cases on social media you would never imagine, really. I was shocked myself. It's usually typical proper social media engagement, but sales do take place over there. They target young populations too. So wherever you have communities, obviously criminal organizations are operating. So that's worrying. Darknet, I should say, is still very active too. So across all segments online. So that's a big deal. That's priority number one for us. That takes a lot of resources. I know this is very much law enforcement priorities too. Interpol, Europol, a number of law enforcement agencies are very much focusing on this topic. So that's number one. The number two is also a sort of a shift or balance in terms of categories that I described earlier on. Counterfeiting still remains category number one, no doubt about this, but we've seen a decrease since the beginning of the pandemic in terms of overall volume of incidents, counterfeit incidents across the industry. Versus the supply chain related topics, so theft and illegal diversion for the most part. And these have been increasing quite a bit. Explanations may still be a bit too soon to really have a firm explanation about this. My take is also criminal organizations have the same problems as everyone else. You have to manufacture these counterfeit products, and they have been disrupted like everyone else in one way, one shape or form. And I guess it's sometimes easier just to go and steal. Hit a truck, steal what you can. Doesn't cost much in terms of the logistic to organize your operation. But at the end of the day, the profit can be significant if you steal a significant volume of products. Same goes for illegal diversion. So as I said, they're very agile. They diversify themselves, they adapt to the market constraints. And we have seen this shift pretty clearly last few months as well. So the pharma supply chain, generally speaking, is under pressure. On top of that, it's also correlated to the pandemic. Now it's all about whatever can treat or cure COVID, obviously. So we started with the protective equipment, we had the masks, and then we had the gels, and then we had the possible therapies. You would all remember everything that was discussed about hydroxychloroquine at the time, on azithromycin, on any other therapies. I won't mention them all, but there's been quite a few on the market. Obviously, now we're talking about the vaccines. This is exactly what criminal organizations are targeting. So some have been very agile in turning things around and manufacturing counterfeits. So we've seen counterfeits of these products fairly quickly on certain markets. And others resorted to stealing or diverting the genuine ones that were distributed because they were leveraging a fairly challenging situation on the supply chain level. And I think that they took opportunities on this. So it is a fairly complex environment at the moment, but obviously the most targeted categories right now are, you will understand, anything that is related to COVID-19. But there is a certain level of collateral damage on all the other therapeutic areas that are still underserved. And I think that has been fairly widely discussed across the healthcare industry. Obviously, people still have cancer, still have other conditions, they need to be treated, and there are other challenges on this. And criminal organizations are leveraging these gaps on these shortages. So yeah, it's a bit of a messy situation right now, which is usually a blessing and an opportunity for criminal organization always. If you have a good crisis, for them it never goes to waste, that's for sure. That's how we conclude that.
Yeah, it's prevalent. It's, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. I think Nicola had referenced a stat earlier that originally at the height it was 50% and now down to 38, which is better, but not there. So we've got a long way to go. So I guess leading into my next question, Nicola, can you discuss the challenges, both from the vetting and procurement perspective, and what, an organization to do without being an internal testing body? Like, what systems did you put into place to, protect against that counterfeit? I mean, I think you've kind of touched on this before, but you can elaborate what, measures others can take.
Exactly. So first of all, we equalized HQ and the field sourcing because the risk is equal either if you're buying it in country, in Africa or Middle East, or if you're dealing it from the HQ. And we did trainings and sent out massive number of information about how to vet the product internally using online sources we had available at the time. Then we expanded to a third-party company who was verifying the certificates, either by the going to FDA website, to NIOSH website, to NADO, cert notified body cert site, or directly communicating with the company or the manufacturer, trying to determine, for example, if you have a batch number, it's one way of trying to determine whether the batch number is actually, if manufacturer can confirm that it came from their facility. That said, Extend said they can have a batch number on the packaging and something inside completely different, right? So like I said, foot on the ground, third-party monitoring agency to confirm at loading that the product is actually what we agreed to be. And it goes through not just looking, in our case, for International Medical Corps, and I'm sure colleagues here who deal with supply chain, the paperwork has to be right. The quantity needs to match the packing list information on top of that. Damages to secondary packaging or tertiary packaging, and everything else needs to really be what is agreed to be able to pass. Those working in April in Chinese market know that the Chinese government changed the law 4 times on what the markings have to be on the packaging and everything else. Every single time we had to set back, go back, repackage, new packaging material and all that. Also, it was very challenging for us, for example, to have most of the information on Chinese. So we had to engage translation companies or individuals to help us understand what those documents mean and so on. Further than that, we tried to cut the middlemen, right? Because what happened is that the traditional market just disappeared, right? Those who are involved in procurement know that there are a number, and I saw here colleagues from USAID, right? There is a USAID BHA pre-qualified list of 14 suppliers that we have trusted to have the high quality assurance process. They are in the market for 40 plus years, and we trusted what they do, and the product they offer us is of a high quality. But they were not able to service us. So moving to non-traditional markets, we saw companies who were like just an online, or we call them suitcase companies, right? One-man band who were offering stuff, and it was incredible how the speed at which they were offering. They would say, hey, they would find us on the internet or something, say, we have 1 million gloves available, take it or leave it, 1 hour, $1 million. I'm like, there's no way we can do that, right? And then, so after a couple of weeks and a couple of months later on, we weaved out those that we can trust and work with and continue a relationship with these additional steps to the quality assurance. And also, like I said, we try to go and talk to manufacturers directly. As Stan mentioned, cold vaccination after the PPE wave, now there's a wave of, cold chain equipment and everything related to vaccination campaigns. And we're very active in that in a number of countries, which meant that we concentrated now on the equipment that comes with to maintain the cold chain equipment, the supply chain. And this is where we're talking directly to some of the manufacturers on supporting ministries of health in countries where we work. And then talking to manufacturer, of course, you are reducing the risk significantly in that place. But to get to their table, it takes an effort to be invited and work with them. So I would say those are the 3 or 4 major things that we did. And again, Mercia is my colleague working basically in a different way of supply chain. And for us, the GIK or donated products have to go to same scrutiny as procured one to make sure that the end user basically gets the right product.
Thank you, Nicolo. Yeah, and that's a good point because, we did add some additional layers of protection. So additional steps to where all offered donated PPE had to go get thorough vetting through the technical unit, and that the same process as procurement before we would accept or move anything. So, which I think is critical. And I know we've talked about it a little bit, but if you can, talk a little bit about how COVID affected the work at NPPTL, right? Like maybe understanding, I know you touched on a little bit of the testing. Can you expand on that? Like what you're looking at specifically and why that's important?
Sure. There was 2 things I didn't mention earlier that were pretty critical during the response. We explored source control. That was a big issue. NIOSH took action to conduct critical research to explore the reality about what is coming out of exhalation valves and how source control of these respirators compared to the gold standard for source control, surgical masks. Based on this research, CDC guidance was updated to reflect that a NIOSH-approved N95 filtering facepiece respirator with an exhalation valve offers the same protection to the wearer as one that does not have a valve, as source control findings from the NIOSH research suggests that even without covering the valve, N95 respirators with valves provide the same or better source control than surgical masks and or fabric face coverings. So that was one main thing that we were looking at. And the other thing I wanted to build upon that was stated earlier, I think that Nikolai was talking about is, the surge in consuming these N95s has sort of subsided, and there's, as far as the approval process from us, we had a lot of manufacturers in the beginning trying to get into the business, and our process is pretty rigorous. They've made it through the process, and now that we're back to a new plateau of demand, these poor companies that have set up and invested in all this are not finding the sales there that they thought they were going to find during the peak of the pandemic. So, and that gets, if there's another surge in demand, we're right back to square one. So that's something that I know that a lot of governments around the world are looking at, is how do you maintain this capacity to produce, PPE, but also other, medical devices, equipment, and supplies.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, so I guess that the next thing I think that's kind of a good segue into another, impact of this, and that's in reference to the illegal activities and safety. So Stan, I'm going to ask you this question. So from, regarding the illegal activities and on patient safety, what is the impact beyond, I think we kind of touched on this before, but I'd love to know how we're capturing, tracking, and measuring that. And then, if you can briefly touch on like what is being done to stop that.
Yes. I think there is an underlying assumption, obviously, that is definitely correct. Falsified medicines have a patient safety impact. But about 3-4 years ago, we really started on a journey and saying, okay, sure, but let's demonstrate it forensically over time, so that we have a solid case on this and we can really have arguments to back this up. Because obviously we all know the stats, which are, by the way, unfortunately, still fairly generic. We know a lot of people die at the hands of falsified medicines. It's still extremely difficult to capture and to measure as well. So at least what we started for us is, first we pledged at Novartis to forensically test every single suspect sample that we can get our hands on. It's not always possible. Sometimes even law enforcement refuse to release a sample for whatever reason for an ongoing case, so we can't do that. Even though sometimes you're able to confirm it's counterfeit, we would like to test it. Not possible. It's still a marginal number of cases. All the others, they went to our labs or testing facilities for us to make a full assessment. Then we developed a methodology to fully measure the patient safety impact. We worked on that methodology with colleagues from pharmacovigilance and quality. Pretty simple, with 3 levels of threats, level 1 to 3, and level 3 is serious harms or leading to deaths, basically. So the maximum patient safety impact you could have in that situation. Not surprisingly, honestly, and we were expecting that result, but at least we've been able to demonstrate it through a robust methodology and over time. Over 90% of the samples tested were level 3. As simple as that, because it's pretty, when you have chemicals in this, when you don't have the right API, when you have the wrong one, and again, I gave you the list before, it's pretty straightforward. But then you need to be diligent about this, do the test, record it, measure it against a proven methodology, and then you can start developing metrics as well, percentages overall that we have. And for us, it's pretty clear cut. It's really way over 90% of them are level 3, and that's clear. So it's a lot easier then for us to engage with our stakeholders with this very figure and say, we've done our work, we've tested it, and we know for a fact, everybody does. But for the cases we had, the patient safety impact is extremely serious and has to be addressed accordingly as well. Then we've also worked on the sort of technology and digital tools we can all have for data analytics and visualization. So we've developed as well a tool where we capture the entire footprint, operational footprint that we have on everything we do, from investigation to enforcement to stakeholder engagement, but also in relation to product testing on patient safety impact. So that then we can visualize the discrepancies or differences across regions, across therapeutic areas, across products as well. Some products are a lot more impacted by the counterfeiting category, others more subject to diversion, for instance. So you need to understand how you're impacted and where to be able to allocate resources accordingly and have the right strategy. For instance, we don't have one product that is impacted globally. That for us, that doesn't exist, for instance. It's I won't mention peers from the industry. We could all have a few products in mind where we say globally, that's a big deal. That's not the case for us. I could mention for you a cardiovascular drug that has been very heavily impacted in Asia and in a couple of countries in particular. Anti-malarials, not surprisingly, would be in Africa. There were a couple of oncology products in certain Latin American countries. So it's very targeted based on demand as well. You need to have these data analytics tools to really understand how we're impacted and how we should react to this as well. Otherwise, you have the wrong strategy. So digital tools for data analytics is also very critical for us, and that's how we will leverage it.
Thank you, Stan. I know we're running short on time, but I do want to get the last couple of questions in, and we do have a brief poll that I'd like to put out there to the audience. Nicolo, can you briefly talk about the investment versus return on vetting companies to kind of demystify that, the cost on the pre-inspection?
Sure. So there are two things to consider when engaging them. One is that for us, it was an insignificant amount considering how much of goods we procured and how much we prevented in not just the value of goods that could be rejected at the end, but also the impact of the beneficiary that could have been if we have not prevented some of the issued product. I can say that we spent about $20,000 through Chinese investigations for millions of dollars worth of PPE we purchased so it's really, really small investment. The inspection, of course, doesn't cost the same in every country in the world. It's directly connected to the cost of labor, and it's not connected to the value of the goods. It's just the volume of the goods you're buying, because the more goods you buy, the AQL levels and everything else require you more or less samples taken and so on. It's also important to understand that at the time we realized that, this is additional step into our standard service level agreement or a supply chain agreed timelines. We had to embed that and consider that time as an investment rather than a cost, right? It's always battle of getting the goods as quickly as possible and what you can do with it, but also how to embed this new process into it, right? So those two, I would say it's well worth it for us, and we're now more and more engaging it. I know that DG ECHO, one of the donors, also require this for food products above certain threshold. And as an organization, we're seeing more and more benefit of engaging those companies, especially when we're buying either a new product we're not so comfortable with, or not having a presence or prior experience with the product. So I would say thumbs up for the process by all means.
Yeah, and I think it's well worth the investment, just, when you're talking about, the level of and volume of products that are being moved. So Adam, given the audience, I think I would actually be remiss if I didn't ask about like the average investment needed to receive a NIOSH stamp of approval. Would you be able to briefly answer that?
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's very important for manufacturers interested in obtaining NIOSH approval to understand that they just can't buy a machine and be able to produce and sell products. NIOSH requires both rigid technical performance requirements to be met, such as filtration efficiency and breathing resistance. And we also expect that a manufacturer has an effective quality management system in place. During the response, we received a number of applicants who did not understand the depth and breadth of the NIOSH approval requirements. The bottom line is that the technical requirements of quality assurance need to be met, and there are a continuous auditing process of the products in the manufacturing plant to make sure those requirements continue to be met. The NIOSH program for approving filtering face piece respirators is a multifaceted process that consists of approval for occupational use where the respirator is used in either a medical or non-medical setting. The process relies heavily on comprehensive and complete approval application consisting of a standard application form, pre-test data, simplified engineering drawings, assembly matrix, draft approval labels, quality management system, product quality control plans, application fee, user instructions, and test samples. User instructions are important as well, and the ability to provide customer service, support, and training to the purchasers. Before getting into the business, all of these components should be understood. Our number one concern is the health and safety of the workers who are using these products, and the ability to sustain the quality of the approval is critical to ensuring worker safety.
Thank you. That's really helpful information. So really quickly, because I know we're running out of time and I think there's some fantastic questions coming into the chat. I do want to run a really quick poll from the audience. So I'd love to hear from you guys because, with the recently revoked emergency use authorization for, say, the KN95s, in the US, do you think that it's okay to ship those out to donate those to other countries? And I'm asking you to kind of look at this from a technical and ethical perspective of donating PPE that is no longer accepted in a clinical setting here in the US. So if you can just take a second and, complete the poll, I really appreciate it. And then we'll let you know the results from the audience. While that's taking place, I think maybe a good way to close up the dialogue today is really to talk about, how do we remain vigilant and what the global health community can do to stem this rising tide of counterfeit and falsified products. What flags should we be looking out for? What efforts can we do to, make sure that we're catching those things? Do any of you have like a closing thought on what we can do to mitigate the risks? Because the impacts on health is too high not to kind of take a look at it, from a red flag perspective. I mean, if you can, any one of you can address this, if you will.
I can try. Just One thing we're particularly focusing on for us, the number one priority at the moment, and that may address one of the questions from Victoria at least, what can we do to change the statu quo? Indeed, we also think the same. We investigate as much as we can. We do whatever we can, also reactively, but there is this much that can be done and achieved. So we're looking in the other direction. Now, the bulk of the efforts are on accelerating the timely detection, authentication of falsified medicines wherever they are, and they are usually in remote places, and consequently accelerate the reporting to health authorities. And on top of that, we not only report to local authorities, now we report every single case to WHO at the same time, because we believe that's important. And for that acceleration, personally, we've decided to change the statu quo. We used to have regional setups or even a centralized setup for product testing, forensics and all. And now we're leveraging latest technologies to bring that at a country level. That's happening now. We really want to bring technology to every single country where we operate to be able within minutes to test products and then confirm, is it falsified or not? It's a lot more complex than what people might think. Visually, personally, I could hardly tell you whether the product is fake or not, except maybe 1% of cases. You need forensics and technology to help you with this. And we do that for both packaging and the product. So our belief is technology will help us in fine going a lot faster in authenticating and then reporting. And with that, I believe we could get a bit more action going on where it matters.
Thank you, Stan. Well, I know we're running low on time, and I know there's a lot of great questions coming in. And the majority of you did show that you didn't feel that if it wasn't okay for the US, it's not okay for other countries. So very eye-opening. There was a lot of questions that were not answered directly in the chat because this was such a robust conversation. So I can't thank our panelists enough. So we will be posting those questions, and hopefully our panelists will be able to answer some of those questions directly on the community of practice. But I would love to turn it back over to EJ to wrap things up for us. EJ, over to you.
Hi, still here. Thank you very much. Am I off mute? Just checking.
Yes, you're off mute.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And as you just said, there are a lot of really interesting questions in the chat, and it kind of begs the question, how far do we want to take this down the road as an organization? And I absolutely think that we want to continue this dialogue. So thank you so very much for joining us today. Thank you to all the participants who were really putting some incredibly interesting thinking into the chat. And thank you, of course, to all of our panelists for your time and insight today, for all the work that you do every day. And Marcia, thank you for your vision and commitment to bringing this webinar to life, and in doing so, highlighting how we forge ahead together to ensure safety and equity and global access to medicines and quality medical products. We are all in this together, and PQMD will continue to bring you webinars and host intriguing online discussions through the community of practice. So please be sure to have signed up for it. We will really look to continue this conversation because I think there's a lot more that we can delve into, a lot more experience that we can mine from not only our members, but also those people who are beyond and part of the PQMD network. So again, thank you very, very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.